I've become fascinated in recent years around the idea of scale. So I'm not really talking about scaling, like scaling some technology service or some business or whatever. I'm talking about thinking about things, like zooming out of certain things and really thinking about them from a, how big does this go perspective. I'm going to go through like a couple examples of kind of what I'm talking about. And again, this is just something that's like, this sort of line of thinking has become more and more pervasive for me and really interesting, and also helps explain certain things, I think, that maybe almost seem inscrutable. The other thing that I find really interesting about this conversation around scale is that like it often presents itself in kind of almost counterintuitive ways. I'll see if I can kind of explain what I mean by that too. So where some of this starts for me is thinking about the manufacturing of automobiles, like, cars, trucks. But you could probably apply this same thing to many things, because I bet at some point in your life, you have said the following phrase or something like this, whether it's about a car or something else, and it goes something like this. You've bought something. In this case, I'm talking about a car, and you notice something cheap about it, or something inefficient about it, or something that you think just isn't very good. And you think to yourself, geez, couldn't they have spent the extra $1 and just gotten a better part? Right? So, for example, you take a vehicle and, it shows up and it's got like a crappy cup holder. And you think to yourself, well, the cup holder's already here. Couldn't they have spent the extra like $1 or $2? I mean, come on, it's a $50,000 car. They couldn't have spent the extra couple of dollars to put a better cup holder in here. And you sort of think to yourself like, well, geez, again, it's a $50,000 vehicle. They make so many of these. They're a huge company. Like, couldn't they have done better? Until you think about scale, right? So if you sort of think to yourself, okay, again, we'll talk about a car. If you consider desired price point as a constraint, in other words, if you assume that the manufacturer is looking at the car and saying, this vehicle, based on our market research, the base model must come in under $40,000. It must be $39,900 or whatever. And then you look at that cup holder and you realize that it's not that they didn't spend $1 or $2 for you. It's that across their entire lineup of cars and their entire not inventory, but their entire manufacturing process across all of their vehicles for that year. What if they're producing 500,000 cars? Then that $1 or $2, it's not $1 or $2 to them. If you zoom out, it could be millions, right? There's actually a funny video about this. I'll see if I can find a little short video about sometime there was some airline, I guess, at some point in history that, saved themselves like $40,000 a year by removing one olive from their salads or something. But anyway, separate kind of thing. But at scale, and you got to realize too that, yes, I'm sure auto manufacturers have an idea of how much it costs per car to, create versus what they will bring in on that. And there's a lot of factors there, right? There's warranty pieces, there's recalls, like the total cost, much like the total cost of ownership to a consumer, is not simply purchasing the car and making payments. It's also gas and repairs and this and that and the other thing. For a manufacturer, the total cost of production is not just producing the car. It's also dealing with warranty issues. And, if you look across the entire line, like if they make 200,000 cars of this type or whatever, then, what percentage of those are going to have some sort of recall or warranty issue that they're going to have to pay out of their pockets. And that gets spread like butter across the entire lineup, right? Like, even if you never have a problem with your vehicle, you're paying for someone else to have a problem with their vehicle somewhere in that economic, pipeline. And the same goes for that dollar that they didn't spend on a cup holder. Because across that lineup, it adds up at the not at the unit level, but at the full company level, where somebody somewhere is looking at this and going, well, we could get another $1 million in profits if we pick the cheaper cup holder. Or another $1 million in, maybe not profits, but in, reduce $1 million in expenses, right? And those kind of numbers could be very real. So yeah, you get the crappy cup holder and you would think to yourself, well, they're so big. How could they not spring on the better cup holder? They're making so much money. But that little choice at scale is huge in comparison to if you brought it down to the individual level. And I just find that so interesting. And thinking about, not that I'm trying to empathize with giant companies, that's not really my point here. But when you look at questioning, well, why XYZ in many arenas in life, it's worth asking yourself the question, is this a scale issue? Is this happening because of scale? Or is this an individual thing? And where I think that this, if you talk about home renovations, I think there's an interesting piece here as well, which kind of dovetails with this. Contractors come into your house, right? And a lot of times you'll have similar thoughts sometimes. Like, contractor comes in, does some work. You notice something weird. Like they, didn't sand something and they painted over it or whatever. And yes, it could just be sloppy work. Or maybe they use crappy materials, on some door frame somewhere or whatever. And you ask yourself, like, why, like they're contractors, why don't they just use the better piece? Or, you know what? That's probably a bad example. Let me back up and talk about time, because time is probably the better parallel here for contractors. For people coming in and doing work on a house, where they make their money is how quickly can they get through your job to get to the next job. Because the more jobs they can do in a day or a week or a month or a year, it doesn't pay for them to travel back and forth to your house all day long. It's better to go and start, to get through yours to move to the next one. So you ask yourself, why couldn't they just let the first coat of paint dry longer before getting to the next one? And the answer is because at scale, at their version of scale, where it's not just about your house, it's about your neighbor's house and the one down the street and the one across the way and whatever, and their week, month, year kind of thing, that really adds up overall. But I think that the home renovation thing is also interesting because I think it opens doors to have a conversation with them. Because for you, as the homeowner, you're not operating at scale. You're operating at the individual level. And I think what this enables you to do is to have the conversation with that contractor that walked into your house and say, look, I know you're probably going to want, you're probably going to suggest, let's say they're coming in to do a water heater, right? And they're like, oh, you only need a 50-gallon water heater. And you can say, no, look, because from their point of view, when they think about it across the whole, it makes more sense that most people need a 50-gallon, not a 75 or 100-gallon. But you could go to them and say, hey, just up it. I know it's going to be an extra $500. That's okay. I'll pay it. Now, I'm not saying you have to just ignore your budget, but in a lot of cases, the contractor level item, they suggest because they're used to operating at a different scale than you're thinking about from a homeowner's point of view. It's almost, it's a case of scale mismatch, right? Where it's very useful to them to be thinking about this across the large scale, when for you can think about it just in terms of your house. And generally speaking, they'll do that because to them, it doesn't really matter if they bring in the slightly bigger part, as long as you'll pay the bill to do it. And I think that as a homeowner, it almost always pays to go one step up, because at your scale, you're going to do so many damn projects in your house. Something's always going to break. Something's always going to need replacing. Get the better thing. Spend the extra $200-$300. You're probably going to spend it on something else anyway. But at that time, just spend for the extra thing. And generally speaking, they're going to be fine with that because it doesn't actually impact their scale. They're just making recommendations based on what would be best at scale. Closing out here, there's another thing that I heard this week that finally gave me a concrete example. Because intuitively, I have felt this way or thought this way about sort of this AI LLM revolution that we've all been going through the last couple of years. So intuitively, I just felt that this was true, but I didn't have like a concrete example. And I'll link to the video. It's a Hank Green video that talks about this, or at least I'll try. I got to dig it up, I think. There is a certain degree at which, there's this idea that LLMs are just going to increase productivity almost infinitely. It's worth keeping in mind that they are also costing us productivity. And here's a concrete example of that. Applying for jobs. Think about this for a second. So most people now, when they are applying for jobs, first of all, they're applying for way more jobs than they used to, right? When I was first looking for my first job, I think I applied to like 3 or 4 companies. Very precisely. I got like 2 or 3 interviews and I took one of them. And then like 2 offers and I took one of them, right? It was the total scale was like 4, Now, geez, with LinkedIn and everything else, people apply to a few dozen in a day easily and probably more. And how are they doing that? A lot of these places ask for cover letters. Cover letters are time consuming if you actually write them. You know what makes them less time consuming? Writing them with AI. And that goes for your resume too. An AI is probably going to be better at putting together a resume more quickly. So you, as an individual, you are shoving your data through an LLM so that it can spit out cover letters and resumes efficiently. Then you submit those. Then on the other end of that, companies have put AI and LLM systems in place to read your cover letter and resume and summarize the whole thing so they don't have to read the whole piece of, the full submission, basically. So what's happening? We're using LLMs to put things into a format so that on the other end, another LLM can read it and take it out of that format and break it down into something simpler. That flow, when you think about it, even at the individual level, seems insane. But here's where it ties in, right? Think about that at scale. Think about how many millions of people are applying for jobs every day using this exact flow, and how many companies are taking those resumes and cover letters and pulling them apart and summarizing them so that they don't have to read the very thing that the other LLM put together. And think about then how many tokens and dollars and heat and water and GPUs and server farms and all the rest of it are supporting that at scale, at true scale. Like really try to zoom out and think about what that looks like. It is a massive waste of productivity and many other things. Probably it's a financial burden to everybody. And that's just one process. Think about other things that you use LLMs for to churn things out. And then ask yourself what the likelihood is that whatever you're doing with that on the other side is then taking another LLM to pull it apart and like summarize it, outline it, whatever, so that someone else somewhere else doesn't need to actually read it. And then just zoom out. And I find this just mind-boggling. Like I haven't done the math on this, but it's got to be crazy, right? Really zoom out and think about what the true repercussions are environmentally, in terms of electric, in terms of like just so many things. Wasted time. It's this idea of scale, when you start thinking about it, all of a sudden you start seeing it all around you. It's one of those things. And it really, I think, helps to decipher some of the crazy that we encounter every day in this world.